I guess I've had a little bit of a checkered career. I got my undergraduate education at the University of Oklahoma. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in drama with a major also in English, which isn't the most practical thing to do, but that's what I did, and then realized I had to get a job. And I also had a teaching degree at my mother's insistence. The last thing I wanted to do was teach. So I got a job as a switchboard operator at a television station, and moved eventually from that into having a children's puppet show and doing commercials and generally using a little bit of my drama training. But I went to New York after a few years at a local station in El Paso, where I lived, and I worked in television there. For several years, I was an associate producer and a writer on some children's educational shows, and had just a lot of fun. And enjoyed it very much. I worked for NBC for a while and then ABC. And then I got married, and my husband, who had never, I think, been west of the Hudson, came home with me one day and said, "How could you leave Texas?" and made me move back. And so at that time, we decided to start a family. I had 2 children, and after my second child was born, no, right before my second child was born, we moved to Houston, and I settled down to parenthood full-time, and that kept me entertained for a couple of years. But if you spend all day at home with a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, you can go crazy. I'd been working for too many years, and I missed adult companionship, so I looked around for a part-time job that I could do while my children were in nursery school. And I found a job with a lawyer who needed someone to straighten up his library. I don't think he'd ever updated his books in years. And while I was there, I started noticing what he was doing, and it was really interesting. And I remember coming home one day and saying to my husband, "You know, I wish I'd gone to law school. That's really interesting stuff." I was 37 at the time. And he said, "Well, why don't you go to law school?" I said, "What do you mean, why don't I?" He said, "Go to law school. I mean, you know, there are 2 or 3 law schools in Houston. Why don't you go to law school?" This was in June. Yeah, no, it was May. And I said, "Okay," and I picked up the phone and I called the law schools and I say, "How do you get into law school?" They said, "Well, you have to take the LSAT, and there's one coming up in July." So I took the LSAT in July and applied at 2 of the law schools, and I started law school in August. That was it. It was not something that I had been dying to do my entire life, but the moment I got to law school, I realized it's what I should have been doing. I loved every minute of law school. I loved reading the cases. I used to sit and read my constitutional law book and read some of those Supreme Court decisions and cry. They were so beautiful. They appealed to my patriotism, to my sense of history. Whatever it was like reading a great novel. I had more fun in law school than I think I've ever had in my life. I loved every minute of it. I tell this to some of my colleagues and they think I'm insane because all they can remember about law school is puking after a final or something. But I absolutely loved it. One thing I knew I did not want to do was divorce. I mean, that to me sounded terrible, awful. But one of the reasons I went to law school was I never wanted to work for anybody else again. I had done that working for the networks, and you know, it's just not the best thing in the world to have bosses. So I decided I was going to open my own practice right out of law school. Out of my mind, if I'd thought about it now, I probably wouldn't have. But I did, in a city we'd only lived in a few years, but Houston was one of those cities that if you were willing to work and hustle, you could make a living. And so I hung up my shingle. And what came through the door was women wanting divorces. very interesting. There weren't a lot of women in the profession then, and so a lot of women wanted a woman who they felt could empathize. So the first divorce came in and the second divorce that came in, and I suddenly realized that I had a talent I never knew I had, which is there's something about my voice quality or so. I calm people down. So someone would come in and they were terrified and they were upset and they were angry, and I could calm them down, which is a very useful talent in family law. And I think if you find you can do something well, you want to do more of it. And so I'd say within a year I decided that's all I wanted to do. And I became board certified as soon as I was eligible. And really I've done nothing but family law my entire practice. I throw in an occasional will, but that's about it. I do family law. I love family law. I felt useful, especially in the beginning when I was, I found myself representing a lot of women who had been battered. I found myself representing a lot of women who'd never been in the workplace, who were very terrified, and I found that I could find for them the help that they needed, whether it was a class in learning to budget, or somebody could help them write a resume so they could find a job. It was, I think in a way, I've always felt that the best family lawyers were closet social workers. And I think maybe in my heart of hearts, maybe I should have been a social worker, I don't know. But there is a great satisfaction that comes to me from thinking that I can make a positive difference in someone's life, that I can take someone who comes to me who is fearful and desperate and angry, and show them that doesn't have to be a permanent state. And so there were all these rewards that came from doing the kind of work that I was doing. But as I said, the destruction that I was seeing in the system, the polarization that occurred when people got caught up in the adversarial system, which for me makes sense for a fender bender. It doesn't make sense for a family to take them and say, well, if one person tells their story and the other tells their story, the truth will emerge. Well, all that happens is each of them tells a story that makes the other one so angry that it makes it very difficult for them to feel good about each other, to eventually be able to co-parent. In the course of the anger that's generated, their children are chewed up and spat out by a system that just isn't designed for helping families. I'm a family lawyer. I'm very proud to be a family lawyer, but I'm especially proud to be a collaborative family lawyer, which is where I am hoping family law will go in the future, so that someday litigation will be alternative dispute resolution. That the primary way that people will solve disputes will be through alternative, what they now call alternative dispute resolution, which is mediation and collaborative law. I don't put arbitration in that category, quite frankly, because to me, when I arbitrate, I'm preparing as if I'm preparing for a trial. So to me right now, we have mediation and collaborative law. They are both wonderful techniques, because what they don't do is make people madder than when they started.